Good morning, it's Drew, and welcome to a rather damp and unpleasant June morning here in Herne Bay. Long overdue update on the TVR restoration. Not that I've not been busy doing bits and pieces on it throughout the last few weeks, but I'm now happily in a position where I can start the next major job, which is refitting the clutch and the gearbox. I've got the LOF Power Spec clutch ready to fit, and last week I have reinstalled the resurfaced flywheel on the car, ready to go. So the bolts are all being refitted. They're tightened up to 30 foot-pounds, which is quite a lot, but that's what the spec is as far as I can tell online. Pilot bushing's all cleaned out, ready to go. I haven't replaced it, but it seems brand new like the rest of the clutch, but that one hasn't suffered any harm. The flywheel bolts are obviously Loctited in place as well. So I've given it a degrease, but when I start putting it all together, I'll give it another degrease. Then the job will be to fit the new clutch, get it lubricated, and then dig into the pile of spares at the back of the garage, find the gearbox, and then work out how that goes in. I've been debating this in my head pretty much throughout the whole project, really. Am I going to try and pull the engine out to get it forward, to get enough room to get the gearbox in? But all the stuff online says that you can fit the gearbox okay from underneath. I've got really good access, so I think rather than getting involved with that, I'm going to give it a try. So let's see how we get on. Okay, so another day has gone by. I rewatched the video I made on Monday. Made a mistake. The flywheel bolts are actually tightened up to 60 foot-pounds, not 30 like I said earlier. But yeah, 60 is the magic number. So this morning I popped out and managed to fit the clutch. I had to buy an online clutch alignment tool, but that really just helps you to make sure that the clutches or clutch plate is sandwiched in the right place, so that it's in the right place when you slide the gearbox shaft in. Happy that I've got that right. Happily the LOF clutch kit comes with nice new bolts, so they're in. The paperwork that they've sent through specifies that they've got to be tightened up to 28 Newton meters, I think. I will double check it, but they've just got to be torqued down, which I will do shortly when I've gone inside to check the paperwork. And then that's the clutch in, and then we are moving on to the gearbox stage. Okay, so now actually about a month since the last update that you watched a few seconds ago, and I've been held up for the lack of a plastic clip. Basically I got to the stage of assembling the gearbox. I put the bell housing on and I've done a dry assembly of the clutch release arm, and I was doing some googling just to make sure I'd done it right and put lube in all the right places and stuff like that. And all the advice online for the LT77 gearbox is replace this plastic clip. They snap, it would appear, on quite a regular basis. They're not too expensive, and this one clearly looks a little bit old, and obviously we all know plastic can just get brittle and that with age. So I thought, yeah, while we've got it all apart, I'll replace it. So I acquired one from one of the big TVR spares places, but happened to be the wrong one. I then ordered one online from another parts company, and that got lost in the post. I let them know about it, and they, to be fair, they sent me this one out literally within 2 days. But with all the to-ins and fro-ins, it's been a little while for that to come through. But I really wouldn't want to be going to all this trouble only to have that little plastic bush snap at some point in the, hopefully, well, it would inevitably in a short period after I reassembled the car. So what I'm going to do this morning is get that swapped out, reassemble the arm back into the gearbox, and then see how we get on with getting the gearbox into the car. What I've done, I've jacked it up and secured it on stands at the back. That gives me enough room to at least slide the gearbox under the chassis. Might have to lose this leg on my crane, which I have set up here, which will take the weight of the gearbox while I lift it in and fiddle it into place. Clutch is all done, all secured, all in place and ready to go. It's just whether we can get the bell housing and the input shaft into this gap around the chassis. If not, we'll be resorting to take the bell housing off the gearbox, which is what everybody says, which I think will be a right palaver. Anyway, let's see how we get on. Okay, so we're about an hour or so into the day, and offered up the gearbox. Got my setup's working quite well, and obviously I can take the weight of the gearbox on the crane because I've got the body off, so that really does help, I think. I was kind of hoping, having read one of the big manuals or famous manuals on it, that the gearbox would just refit, and it was only for the taking out of the gearbox you needed to remove the bell housing. But what I thought I'd try to do is demonstrate what the problem is. So it says the bell housing fouls on the chassis, so it does. When you lift the gearbox and the bell housing up on the crane, the kind of casting here for where the clutch slave mechanism sits, that fouls on the chassis as you bring up the gearbox, as does a little lug just down there on this side of the gearbox as well. And then of course you then got to get it up high enough to wiggle it in and get the clutch splines to go onto the drive shaft, lay shaft, whatever it's called. So yeah, it's going to be take the gearbox housing off. Again, having read stuff, the actual process from it isn't overly clear, but what I think you need to do is literally pop off the bell housing, 6 bolts hold that on, then you can lift up the main gearbox and tuck that away back into the chassis. Then you've got room to lift the bell housing in place, and then you can reattach the bell housing and put the clutch arm in the bell housing once it's kind of up in position in the chassis. So that's what I'm going to be attempting next. Okay, so another hour or so has passed by. I managed to get the gearbox lifted up, offered into place, took off the bell housing, and now that is offered into place, and this would appear to be about as much room as you've got to refit both the bell housing bolts and the clutch arm. Now the clutch arm I struggled with on the floor, so we'll have to see how we get on, but there's certainly enough room at the moment to get the bell housing bolts in, so get on with that, and then we'll see where we go to from there. And here we are, probably another hour and a half later. Things are progressing. I'd like to say progressing well, but don't want to jinx myself. So my little jig here with the engine crane holding the gearbox in position seems to be working admirably well. And I've got the gearbox bell housing fitted back onto the gearbox. Nuts all done up, and top tip puts the release bearing on the gearbox input shaft before you put the bell housing back on, because I didn't. I thought I'd have enough room to get it in, but it's tight, so I couldn't get it done. So had to take the bell housing back off, slide on the release bearing, and then fit the gearbox. But a bit of fiddling, trial and error, no problem at all. So the next job is to fit the release arm, which I've got around here somewhere, onto that release bearing. It was a fiddle, and I found it quite hard when I did it with the gearbox on the floor with all the room in the world. So I think it will just have to be patience, trial and error, and see how we go. Well, here we are, another 30 minutes or so. Bit of fiddling, bit of faffing around, not very nice, but the clutch arm is now installed. And if I can get in there to reach something just to move it, that's how the thing works. Really fiddly, because you've got to get these slippers, I think they're called, into that arm to hold the release bearing, both sides, and then you've got to flip. There's like a spring clip on the back of the arm that fits over the ball. You've got to fit that in, but of course it all doesn't quite go, because it's got to stay where it needs to stay in order for it all to work. But yeah, fiddle, about 20 minutes, quite frustrating, but suddenly with a click it went in. So yeah, feeling quite happy about that. You give these bell housing bolts a quick torque down, and then it's simply a case of refitting the gearbox. As long as I've got that clutch plate centrally aligned, we should be okay. So update later. And finally, success. The gearbox is in place. Needs a final fit. I've got to work out how to put the rear gearbox mount in. I've got the first couple of bell housing bolts in just to nip it up. Bit of a gap there because everything's not quite lined up, but yeah, it's all gone in place, all snugged in nice and tight. Yeah, can take that as a success, go and have some lunch to celebrate, and then try and tie it all up later on.